Namaste. My name is Kirti, and on behalf of Himalayan Yoga Association, I welcome you all to this online teacher training course. I am a teacher here at Himalayan Yoga Association, and I will be taking you through the concepts and details of the human body and yoga altogether. Let's hope you enjoy this course. Let's start.
Namaste and welcome back to the online teacher training course. In today's video, we are going to discuss the structure and anatomy of the pectoral girdle or the shoulder joint. But before we go ahead and do that, I request you all to come together and chant with me the Gayatri Mantra. Simply sit with your spine completely erect. Adopt a mudra of your choice. It could be the Gyan Mudra, Chin Mudra, or any other mudra that you prefer. And rest your hands on your knees, close your eyes, and allow yourself to immerse in these few moments of silent observation of the breath. Very slowly and comfortably breathe in and breathe out. Observe the effect the breath leaves on your mind and your body. Try to spend as much time as you can on every breath you take. Once you've gained the complete attention of the mind on your breath and there are no new thoughts popping up in your mind, let's start chanting the mantra. Bring your hands together in front of the chest. Namaskara Sthiti. Touch the heart center with the back of your thumbs. Keep the chest open. And if you know the mantra, you can chant it with me. Otherwise, you can always repeat it afterwards. Slowly breathe in once. Om Bhur Bhuva Swaha Tatsavitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Having absorbed the vibration and effect of the mantra, let's generate some energy between our palms by rubbing them against each other and transfer this energy to your eyes. First, cover your eyes with your palms. Massage your face, the back of your neck, shoulders, elbows, knees, wherever you wish to transfer this energy to. Please do not open your eyes yet. Once again, fold your palms, bow down to your fingertips and the universal truth. With a few blinks, open your eyes and welcome back. Namaste. So, the shoulder joint, also called as the pectoral girdle, is a very important structure in itself. It is something that makes our life easier because it allows us to interact with the outside world with the availability of the hands. If you remember, then the human body can be broken down into two portions, the axial skeleton as well as the appendicular skeleton. The girdles or the connection between the appendicular and the axial skeleton still fall under the category of appendicular skeletal system. The shoulder joint is basically found where the three different bones coming together to form the structure of the pectoral girdle. The scapula or the shoulder blade, along with the clavicle bone or the collarbone, as well as the upper part of the humerus or the upper arm, they all come together to form the stability, the structure, and the purpose of the entire shoulder joint as it is. Now, there are various ligaments, as you already know. are responsible for stabilizing and for creating the synovial cavity of the ball and socket shoulder joint that it is. The shoulder joint is capable of doing all sorts of movements. It is capable of rotations, adductions, abductions, flexion, extension, hyperextension, circumductions, you name it, they have it. That is the beauty of having a ball and socket joint, that all the movements are possible in case of the ball and socket joint. But because of the nature and the location of the shoulder joint, the socket end of the ball and socket joint in this case is comparatively smaller as compared to the hip joint or the pelvic girdle. There are 4 different ligaments that form the entire structure of the shoulder joint, but first let's talk about the various bones that come together to form the structure. Let's talk about the clavicle bone or the collar bone. You can place your hands here. This collar bone right here is the clavicle bone. It is a long bone in nature and it is the only horizontally lying bone found inside the human body. All the other long bones found in the human body, they are vertically placed because they are supposed to maintain the body weight of the human body in certain ways wherever they are located. On the same lines, the clavicle bone, the collar bone is horizontal in nature and it is responsible for connecting the shoulders or the upper limbs to the axial part of the human body or to the axial spine. The clavicle bone is connected to the upper part of the sternum called as the manubrium, or we can also say it is connected to the very first spine, the very first rib of the rib cage from the front side and from the anterior medial perspective. So the anterior medial part of the clavicle bone is connected to the topmost part of the sternum, which is the connection of the spine and the rib cage. The clavicle bone has another connection. The lateral connection of the collar bone is connected to the scapular bone, or also called as the shoulder blade. The scapula is basically the blade which is flat in nature and it is placed on the back side of the human body. The third bone, which is the main bone in creation of the shoulder joint, is called as the humerus, or the proximal end of the humerus bone. The entire humerus bone is not included in the shoulder joint. That's because only the proximal end or the upper part of the upper arm is coming together and connecting to the scapular bone as it is. Now, before we go ahead and understand what is the whole anatomy, how they make things happen, let's go ahead and study this whole structure physically as well. Now let's see everything, at least the skeletal aspect of the entire pectoral girdle in this skeletal model right here. If you pay attention over here, then you can see that the clavicle or the collar bone, the anterior medial aspect of the collar bone is connected to the topmost part of the sternum bone. The topmost part right here is called as the manubrium. The lateral end of the entire clavicular bone is connected to the scapular bone with the help of the various protrudements coming out of the scapular bone. Now, in perspective, the long bone that the scapula is responsible for raising the shoulders, or we can also say that it is responsible for the elevation and the depression movement of the shoulder joint. But it does not do it alone. Of course, it takes the help of the shoulder blade as it is, which you can see right here. The shoulder blades, which are also called as the scapular bones, they are comparatively complex as in comparison to the various other flat bones inside the human body. They also have very different roles to play. They are bigger in size, as you can see, as compared to a lot of different bones. And this whole complex structure has two different processes coming out of it, which forms the cavity and the structure of the entire shoulder joint. The topmost cavity of the process of the scapular joint right here is called as the acromion process, which is the connection between the clavicle bone, the lateral part of the clavicle bone, along with the acromion process of the scapular bone. This joint is called as the acromioclavicular joint, while the other connection of the clavicle bone in the sternum is called as the sternoclavicular joint. Sterno coming from the bone's name sternum, and clavicular coming from the bone name clavicle. Similarly, because of these different attachments, there are different joints named after wherever the two different bones come together. And here the lateral aspect of the clavicle bone is called as the acromioclavicular joint, wherein, as you can make out, the acromion process, this protrudement, the upper superior protrudement of the scapular bone is connected to the lateral end of the clavicle bone, calling it the acromioclavicular joint. The third joint, which is happening in case of the shoulder joint, is between the upper part of the humerus bone with the cavity of the clavicle bone, the scapular bone, The upper part of the humerus bone, or the ball aspect of the humerus bone, is sitting comfortably in the empty glenoid cavity of the scapular bone. These two processes, the Coraco process, which is the lower process, as you can see right here, as well as the acromio process, which is the superior process protruding from the scapular bone, is creating a socket aspect of the entire shoulder joint, which is called as the glenoid fossa or the glenoid cavity. And the upper portion of the upper arm, the upper portion of the humerus bone, sits perfectly in this glenoid cavity and this is where the name the Glenohumeral Joint comes from, wherein the glenoid process and the connection between the upper arm of the humerus bone forms the Glenohumeral Joint. So, three different joints forming the entire structure. Now, let's talk about the different ligaments. Ligaments, they play a very important and big role in case of the structure and the function of the entire shoulder joint as it is. There are various ligaments present in case of the human body. Let's see right here. The first ligament that you can see right here is called as the Glenohumeral Ligament, also called as the GHL ligament. The Glenohumeral ligament is basically the ligament which connects the glenoid process, the empty cavity of the scapular bone, with the humerus bone. The Glenohumeral ligament forms a watertight sac around the entire shoulder joint, and it creates the space for the synovial cavity to be present in case of the ball and socket joint that it is. There is also the Coracoclavicular Ligament, a ligament which is joining the Coraco process or the inferior process coming out of the scapular bone with the acromio process coming out from the scapular bone. So these two protrudements, even though they are coming from the same bone, they are somewhere covering the entire shoulder cavity. This particular ligament is creating a closure to the entire shoulder cavity, which resides on the inner side of the entire shoulder joint of the scapular bone. The third ligament which is present in case of this human pectoral girdle is the Coracoclavicular Ligament, which comes from the coracoclavicular, basically the scapular bone connecting to the Coraco process of the scapular bone. This ligament is responsible for placing and connecting the clavicle bone to the shoulder joint, or even though the direct connection of the clavicle bone is with the acromio process of the scapular bone, but with the help of this ligament, the entire thing also gets more stability and more structure as it is. The transverse humeral ligament is the ligament which connects the humerus bone to the backside of the scapular bone, which you can see right here. This transverse panel is something which is connected to the humerus bone. In complete principle, the shoulder joint is less stable as compared to the hip joint, but because of these various ligaments, the shoulder joint is able to do so many movements, but it is still not as strong as stable as a hip joint. And nature has provided the human body the particular shoulder joint each and every way through which it can maintain its stability while still being very productive at the same time. There is one very important ligament which is present in case of the shoulder joint, and that is called as the glenoid labrum. The glenoid labrum is basically found on the inside of the socket aspect of the glenoid cavity. It forms a rimming structure on the outer edge of the glenoid cavity, which helps in deepening the entire socket portion of the glenoid cavity. As I've already told you that the glenoid cavity is not as deep as compared to the pelvic girdle, which means that it is not as stable as the as the hip joint, but because of the glenoid labrum, it is able to create a deeper socket just because the shoulder, the head, the ball socket of the head joint needs to be placed in accordance with the socket aspect of the scapular joint. All of these different ligaments, they are responsible for providing the stability, structure and the function of the shoulder joint. If there is a disturbance in any of these, if there is a tear or damage in any of these ligaments, then you will definitely start experiencing shoulder pain, shoulder instability and shoulder destruction as well. Now, let's talk about the different muscles which form the entire shoulder joint as it is, and we cannot refuse to acknowledge the very first muscle that comes to your mind anytime we think about the shoulder joint. It is called as the deltoid muscles. The deltoid muscle is basically a triangular shaped muscle which is also the strongest and the largest part of the muscular system related to the pectoral girdle. The deltoid muscle covers the entire shoulder joint or the glenohumeral joint from the back, from the posterior to the anterior part and everywhere in between. This particular joint is responsible for creating all the strength that it needs, that you need to raise the arm, and all the strength, the major strength and stability related to the shoulder joint or related to the arms itself comes from the deltoid muscles present on top of the shoulders. The other aspect, muscular aspect of the shoulder joint is called as the rotator cuffs. The rotator cuffs are basically 4 different muscles coming together to give the shoulder joint the different movements and the different functions that it is able to perform. The rotator cuffs are basically found with the help of infraspinatus muscle, supraspinatus muscle, teres minor, as well as another small muscle called as the suprascapular muscles. Suprascapularis right here. So these 4 small muscles which are present around and on the underarm portion of the human body, they all come together and they are located at the deeper ends of the human body. They are not present on the forefront, but they are located at the deeper end, and they are the muscles which are responsible for providing the rotation and the abductions and the adductions related to the human arm. All of these muscles, which are very, very small as an individual, but they're all coming together to form this entity called the rotator cuffs, are responsible for various movements, stability and functions of the entire shoulder joint. Now, in the arm itself, there are many other muscles which are responsible for stabilizing the entire shoulder joint. For example, there are the pectorals, which are mainly the pectoralis major, which is the upper chest as it is. The pectoralis major is basically responsible for stabilizing anytime you're trying to take the hand backwards. So if you understand the concept of agonist and antagonist, then the pectoralis major as well as the trapezius muscles of the back, they work as agonists and antagonists anytime you're trying to do movements related to the hand. In case if you're trying to take the hand backwards, then the entire shoulder joint, the pectoral muscles, they extend to support the pulling or the contraction of the trapezius muscles, which are located on the back side of the human body, covering the entire scapular area. When this function changes and when the entire hand is coming towards the front, in that case the pulling power is obviously coming from the deltoid muscle, from the various rotator cuffs, but in case they are also getting a lot of support from the pectoralis majors or the upper chest muscles. So these are all the different muscles that form the entire pectoral joint as it is. There are so many other different aspects, so many different muscles. For example, the biceps, there is the triceps, which is covering the back side of the entire biceps area, and where the deltoid muscles end. They also play their own roles when it comes to stabilizing the joint. But as long as we talk about the connection or the joint, which is the pectoral girdle, it is possible with the help of the rotator cuffs, the deltoids, and all of these different muscles, bones, and ligaments coming together. I want you to understand this whole anatomy of the pectoral girdle and apply this knowledge whenever you're trying to work with the asanas that you practice yourself. Whenever you're going to work on these different asanas, you'll realize and observe that every movement will leave a different impact and a different feeling on specific portions of the human body. Once you understand which part of the body are you working with, you will be able to observe the changes that also takes place in case of that particular portion. And of course, when you are able to point out these individual effects, you will be able to implement this knowledge into becoming better teachers yourself. I hope you found today's video informative. I will see you again next time. Until then, thank you and namaste.